Okay, good evening everyone, and welcome to the 6th edition of the Briefing Room, which is a far more intimate affair tonight, where we're a group of three due to gremlins in the work of Ian Douglas, whose microphone has failed him. We may get joined by someone at short notice along the way, but we're going to be having a bit more of a laid-back approach to things tonight. And it is a very special night, the night that we are recording, because tonight is the evening of Sean Connery's 90th birthday. So I'm joined by Ian Lasky and Joe Miller, and we're going to be briefly talking about Sean and his impact, and then we're going to be having a bit more of a kind of leisurely discussion about what it is to be a Bond fan, what fandom means really, and also when we first realised that we ourselves are Bond fans. But before we go any further, look, I've laid on something quite special. You ready?
Oh, well, there you go.
Look, happy birthday, Sean. It is a big, 90 years old. Just in a very briefest of nutshells, Joe, what does Sean Connery mean to the Bond series?
Oh, well, everything really. Is a quintessential Bond. Without him, there just wouldn't be. I don't think there'd be the series we've got now. I think there could have been a run of films, but I don't think it would have the longevity it's had. Yeah, amazing.
Do you think they'd have managed to sort of get out of the 60s, or do you think it would have been, without Sean, do you think it would have been a kind of the 60s footnote, really?
I think so, yeah. I think they did very well to find him, to have somebody with that charisma that appeals to both men and women in the way that he did. I think that was.
And Ian Lasky, your thoughts on Sean before we move on?
Yeah, no, I agree entirely. I think that you know, cinema is full of potential film series that fail because the audiences just don't connect with actors or they're just not interested. And then if you think about those film series, including Bond and anything else, Indiana Jones, you know, the Marvel movies, whatever, the ones that take on a big success usually have an actor or actors in the center of it that are really popular. And I think that Sean Connery is integral to the success of Doctor No. I genuinely don't think, well, I don't know, but I don't think the series would have been anywhere near as successful had somebody else taken the role at that point. Even somebody famous, you know, even if it had been somebody like Cary Grant, because you'd be looking at it as a Cary Grant movie.
Yeah.
I think he's vitally important to the success. You know, you only have to watch the footage of him when he's in Japan filming. You only twice when he's getting mobbed left, right, and centre to see how hugely popular he is.
I mean that. I think it's from the footage from You Only Live Twice. So I think he makes some reference to the Beatles, doesn't he? Where he says there were 4 of them and I'm on my own. And you kind of think, and what shocks me is where you see that footage and you realise what a tiny amount of protection he had. How accessible he was as a kind of physically as a human being to other people kind of mobbing him and being around. I mean, I know Ian, we've had some discussions in the past about the difference between a great actor, a great movie star, what actually makes a great actor. Sean Connery is certainly a great movie star, a great star attraction within a film. And I'm not sure whether it makes him a better actor or not. I never sit there and think he's being a good actor or he's not being a good actor. I just take him for what he is in that part. And if that part kind of bends to him being Sean Connery, I think he's got the charisma to pull it off, really, which is quite a rare thing. So yeah, I think it's well documented. It's absolutely fantastic. So happy birthday to Sean Connery. Okay, sort of moving on to a kind of general point of discussion. I was listening to a thing on Absolute Radio where they kind of use the same questions to different celebrities each week. And one of the questions is, what was your first memory? And you get an array of answers of kind of what's your first memory. And I was kind of thinking, I don't really know what my first memory is, but I know I must have been very young simply because of what was happening in the memory. So I'm going to ask you to cast your minds back and to think, what is your first memory of James Bond or of knowing that was something that excited you, or you may be a Bond fan? I'm going to ask Ian Lasky that one first.
You see, I don't know. I can't say with any real concrete certainty what the first Bond film or fraction or fragment of the first Bond film that I saw was as a kid, because they were always on TV, whatever, Easter holidays, Christmas, all that. I would say that the first Bond film that I remember being really into that had been shown on TV was Moonraker. So I'm guessing that was probably 1980, something like that, by the time it got onto TV. And then I remember very much being aware of the release of For Your Eyes Only in the cinema. So although I didn't get to see it in the cinema, I was aware that it was out there, saw it on magazines, saw it on covers of annuals and stuff like that. So I think those two films are intertwined as my sort of first Bond movie memory.
Joe?
Well, I'm ashamed to say my first recollection of being introduced to the character of Bond was when my dad said, I think I was probably about 8 or 9, he said, I think you should watch one of these films. I think you'll really enjoy it. It'll be, something you'd enjoy. Come and watch this with us. And I think it was From Russia with Love. And I just couldn't get on with it. I just thought it looked really old and it was really slow. And actually my memory of it was in black and white. Obviously, clearly it's not. But that's kind of, I just associate it with being an old film. It looked really dated. And I didn't watch it all. I think I disappeared into the next room to play on the Atari. But then a few years later, when I was 12 years old, I came across A View to a Kill on ITV. It was the beginning of the summer holiday. I think they were showing the sort of series of Bond films. And I just kind of caught it by accident, really. I started watching it, and I was a fan always of things like the A-Team and MacGyver, and kind of this just seemed a bit like a slightly more grown-up version of that. There was a bit of kind of it been feeling a bit more grown-up, a bit more adult, and but still had that mischievous kind of fun, action-packed, humorous, adventurous character. And I just got completely sort of taken away with the whole film. I just thought it was fantastic. And then it was my mum telling me that, there's more of these films. And then there was one a week for the next 6 weeks or so. And then I was really hooked. So I think I was a fan from the first film. I don't know if you can be a Bond fan from watching one film. But it certainly didn't take me to watch all 16, I think it was, at the time that were out for me to become a James Bond fan.
I think it's strange because I kind of got snippets, really. I mean, I know my gran had the little corgi Aston Martin, so she had like a box of cars, and she had the little corgi Aston Martin, and I know I was given the Lotus with the little bit came out, and you could do a little bit. So I know I had the toys, and I think it's like anything like that when you're that age. It's kind of, you think back now of, when did I sit down and watch an entire Bond film? Well, probably never at that age. It was probably just an excuse, along with being Superman or Spider-Man or anything like that. You just watched bits of it, and then you went away and you kind of pretended to be that character for a bit when you're just kind of little. But I distinctly remember, Joe mentioned it then, and I think ITV's got an awful lot to answer for.
Yes. Yes.
They made such a thing of the James Bond film, like once like you say, once a week. And I don't know if they did it in seasons or they always did it chronologically or whatever. But it was a big thing, and I was never allowed to watch all of it. I was only allowed to watch the first part. So I think I know the start of all the Bond films, or from a young age knew them really, really well. So I was allowed to watch it up to a certain time or point. That was a big thing. That kind of, whatever night it was on, we're going to sit down and we're going to watch the James Bond film. And looking at the radio times or TV times, thinking, there it is, the James Bond film, and looking to see which Bond film it was. Because you have to think then as well, it was a Sean film or a Roger film, really. Those, by and large, it was one of those two, and you would just look to see who it was. So the next question I'm going to ask, really, is about the films in general. And a bit like other series, not just James Bond, there seems to be some films within the series that are definitely favourites with the fans, and others that maybe are not so popular with the fans, but may well have been popular with the general public. Which films in the Bond series do you think are particularly liked by the fans, and which ones do you think are perhaps more films that are popular with the general public? And I'll aim that at Joe.
Well, I think all the films are popular with the public because they always do well. I think it's whether they last in the memory of the public. And I certainly think I've discovered that there are certain films that are more fan films that surprised me when I sort of came into the sort of Facebook groups, that they were so well loved because they weren't really necessarily high on my list of favourite Bond films. So on Her Majesty's Secret Service, I think being the one that people quote as being the fan film. And I think there are others probably like Quantum of Solace. I don't think that was necessarily a favourite with the public, but perhaps fans are getting a little bit more kind of well, that film's getting more recognition now from the fans that's coming back in. I certainly think there are films that are both appealing to the fans and the public. So Spy Who Loved Me or Skyfall, Skyfall across the board, I think was held in high regard with both the public and fans. I'm not a big fan of Skyfall, but I think generally I'm against trend on that one. But other films that I think probably are fan films, maybe License to Kill. I think there's a group of fans that probably hold that in higher regard, or perhaps both the Dalton films actually, more so fans than the public.
I mean, it's the strange thing is that there are certain films, certainly on the group, that get quite a lot of airplay and attention, whereas the ones that possibly people would think are almost, you can take it as read that they are universally popular, don't actually get that much conversation, that much. You don't really get that much being said about Skyfall. You don't really get that much being said about the early Sean Connery films. Not really. You don't get many discussions about From Russia with Love, for instance. Whereas on the group, you do tend to get attention paid to the films that seem to cause a bit of division or seem to split fans. Ian, what are your views on what films? Let's ask you the opposite, really. Which ones do you think really caught the imagination of the general public?
Well, probably your favourite, Diamonds Are Forever. A film like that was hugely popular, but I suspect if you go into groups like our own or other Bond groups and you put that movie out there, it's going to get a certain amount of derision from fans. I would imagine, films like Moonraker, Spy Who Loved Me, those are big populist Bond films. Although I think Spy Who Loved Me gets an awful lot of love as well. I would say that's one that crosses borders between, the casual fan, the hardcore fan, and the general public. Moonraker, on the other hand, again, I think that gets a lot of derision. I suppose it's a lot of it is down to there's always going to be that element with fandom of these come from novels. So the closer you are to the novels, and there's going to be a lot of fans who take the novels as the Bible for these films. So the closer the adaptations are, the first 3 or 4, the more sort of popular they are going to be with the fans. And then I guess the movies that have moved, further away. You Only Live Twice, is another one that I suspect. Again, that was a very, very popular film, but, is it the hardcore fans, do they particularly love that one? I don't know. But going back to your point about, certain films kind of don't get talked about as much and other ones do get focused on a lot. I think there is an element with fandom, again, of championing the underdog. And there's always that element of what makes us fans better than the general public is that we know something more than you do. And we know the true great films and the true great actors. So, for years, On Her Majesty's Secret Service was, I wouldn't say it was derided or anything. I think a lot of people thought it was a good film, but it didn't have the esteem that it has now. With people like Christopher Nolan, writing, articles about how great it is a piece of cinema. And so it's one that we fans champion because of that. And again, with Timothy Dalton, he didn't, for whatever reason, maybe didn't click with the general public as much, but the fans adore him. Sorry, I have this sort of psychological thing. Whenever I say fan, I go fan. I'm not being condescending in any way at all. But I think that's true. I think so. When you talk about films like, no one really talks about Dr. No that much, and yet it's arguably the most important one because it's the first. It's a given that Goldfinger is really well liked. It's probably a given that Thunderball is really well liked. So you don't get them discussed as much because there's not as much meat to the discussion.
Do you think, I'm just picking up on your point there about do you think social media plays a big part in it, in that were those people always there and did they always feel like that? It's just they didn't have a forum for saying that they felt like that. So, when you listen to quite a few fans, you would think that they were quite upset that Timothy Dalton stopped being James Bond, that they wanted him to continue. It's just that you wouldn't, apart from, I was trying to think, if back in the 70s and 80s, you had an issue with the makers of a film about what they decided to do, where do you go? You can write somewhere. What do you write to a PO box? Do you, what do you do?
Fanzines.
Yeah, fanzines. So were those people always there? It's just that you wouldn't know because, it's not blasted across the airwaves. I don't know, but it does, the people who are saying those things aren't saying, and I've only just recently come to think like that. They very much feel that's the way they always felt.
I think you've hit on something massively significant. I think social media and the internet has changed a lot of things. I mean, I remember starting to travel the internet in the late 90s, early 2000s, and I was discovering lots of film sites there. I think the first one I discovered it wasn't Bond related, it's just a general film fanzine. It's quite a famous one, which is Ain't It Cool News. And then you suddenly got this idea of people who would hear things about movies, would write in their little bits of gossip or behind the scenes stuff or little reviews, and it goes out to a global community. And, I guess it was the birth of sort of modern film geek culture and stuff like that. So yeah, I think you're spot on. I think the internet and social media has changed the dynamic massively. For good, mostly, but sometimes for bad.
It's also changed my own views as well. I think my views about Bond were fairly static, having been a Bond fan for 6 or 7 years before going on the internet. And it continues to change my views as well. Hearing what other fans have to say and what they enjoy, what they see in the films. Maybe it's partly as my, as I change over time, I see different things in the films. But I think I do, my views are challenged in a good way from the other fans, and I really like that about fandom, actually, to sort of, re-evaluate my views of the films. It certainly made me look at On Her Majesty's Secret Service in a different light. It's still not one of my favourites, but it's certainly not where it was before, I went onto the Facebook groups.
I mean, that's the, I didn't really, I've been a bit of a technophobe really, and I didn't, certainly even when I was at kind of college, university in the 90s, I didn't really, I was still very much a kind of electronic typewriter type and used to avoid the IT department at all costs. So I was quite late really discovering social media, internet and stuff like that. And I think I went into it very naively. Joined certain groups and thought you could just say how you felt about things and it would all be quite friendly. Not Bond. It was actually a music-based group. And you suddenly realise quite quickly that you may be a fan, but you're not a fan. You can write a throwaway comment or you can say something. Mine was actually to do with Bob Dylan. And I wrote something about Bob Dylan or something I liked, something I didn't like. And it was like you got quoted a million things back. And I didn't expect it. And I think that has been exposed even more recently, and I'd say probably in the last 3 years, where maybe not the power of fans, but certainly the reaction of fans is so huge when it comes to the success or the failure of the promotion of a film. And I think Star Wars would be the biggest example of that, where, you know, I've watched certain things where you think there's genuine, or appears to be genuine hatred directed at certain decisions made. And I wonder what fans are trying to get out of their behaviour. It's almost like I don't know, but, you know, I'm sure I'll pick random. I'm sure Ian Fleming or Gene Roddenberry or, you know, George Lucas didn't sit down at the point they released their first program or film and gather a group of fans and say, whatever happens in the future, you are there to protect the perceived legacy of this first body of work. Never let it change. And it does feel like it's kind of, you know, there's this kind of almost protectionism of fans that actually I think stifles creativity.
Yeah, it's interesting because, you know, I think in general, I mean, I started my travels around the internet in joining film forums, just general film forums, and that was really good fun. And it was actually quite a few years later that I started joining sort of specialized sort of themed groups. And I think, you know, Bond was one of the first ones, and I actually found the Bond groups, generally speaking, very welcoming, compared to some others. But there is a great sense of community that you can get online through, fan groups like this. But the downside exactly is that there is this sense of sort of, I always think it's easier to be negative about something than it is to be positive. You know, even if you're doing a review or just in general, how was your day? Oh, my day was all right, I guess. You know, it's that kind of thing. You're just generally a little bit more negative. And then I think it gets heightened within the sort of online world where it becomes interactive. When you do have a group of people that are very passionate about things, then you're going to end up butting heads. But you don't need to butt heads. You just step away and agree to disagree. But I think that, I think a lot of frustration with fans is, I think there's definitely, and I think it's the minority, not the majority of fans don't like significant change to something that they love. And then when something happens that, you know, they don't necessarily like personally, I think it actually subconsciously reminds everybody as a fan that you're powerless. You're just a consumer. You can't actually change anything. These aren't yours to sort of shape and create and all that. And I think that creates a lot of frustration and anger in people when in reality they just need to sort of step back and just say, hang on, let's have a bit of perspective here. And then when you mentioned Star Wars, what sort of seems to have happened with the last few Star Wars movies, which I don't think is a good move, is certain creative choices have been made in the last couple of movies that seem to back up the hostile views of some of the fans. Oh, you know, the last film was changed because we hated the one before it kind of thing. And, you know, it throws away a lot of whatever, blah, blah, blah. And I do worry that might give some fans, a false sense of power and entitlement that they shouldn't have. None of us should have any power. You know, we should be respected as fans, but we shouldn't be pandered to, in my opinion.
But I think it risks the quality of the films. I mean, you've got 25 films now, and it's got to change, you know? Yeah, I think if it doesn't start pushing boundaries, you know, as it has done with the Craig era, you know, they tried to take a different direction, they did the reboot, that all worked really well, and they're going to have to make other brave decisions, I think, in the future to keep it relevant and current. I think they've got to listen to the fans, and they've got to keep an eye on the competition in terms of the other films, but I don't think they should overly worry what the fans think. I think if they did that with the Craig reboot, they wouldn't have done it. I think if you'd asked the fans if they'd wanted Craig and if they wanted that reboot before it was made, I don't think we would have got what we've got now. And I think the Brosnan era, I think, was stifled a little bit by them trying to pander to the different groups of fans who like the action, who like Moore, who like Connery, who wanted it more serious, but they sort of clung on to the humour, and it was a mishmash. And I think they let go a little bit with the Craig era and sort of followed their creative ideas, and I think that works. And I worry if the Bond fandom becomes like Star Wars fandom, which is quite toxic in places, I think.
But also, I mean, it leads to repetition, doesn't it?
Mm.
If you keep referencing back to the things that you've done before because it makes people feel cozy and safe that they're in known territory, then you're never going to progress, are you? I think people sometimes, the other thing I was going to say, is people sometimes forget that, it's a machine to make money. I know it sounds awful, but it's, the purpose is to get people to watch. So the makers need to produce it. I don't think the James Bond films have ever hidden from the fact that they're there for the masses. Mm. They're there to appeal to the masses, and therefore you need to do things that are contemporary. You need to do things that are going to appeal to a wide age group. Where they've gone wrong with that in the past is where it's been a little bit too mature, or it's excluded the older kids. And in order to do that, having that kind of mass appeal, I always find that it's kind of a mystery. Where do you find that mass appeal? How do you keep it to an entertaining storyline whilst appealing to people from hundreds of countries across an age range from, basically young teenagers and kids all the way up to people who watch James Bond films all their lives? Well, it's not easy, least of all if you're trying to reference what's happened before, add a load of because that's where I think it's gone wrong. I think it went wrong in Spectrum Die Another Day, where it was almost like, I don't buy into this. Oh, it was a nod to the fans, so we put in a few props from the old films. Well, I don't know. I mean, it's not my cup of tea. I'd rather they kept going forward, and maybe trying to just, lead the action genre. Rather than
do you think there's more trust in Eon? As the producers then say, something like Star Wars that keeps sort of changing creative hands. Although I have seen some sort of things online where people are saying it's time for Eon to give up the reins because they're not churning them out quick enough, or they haven't got any more original ideas.
Well, I mean, I first of all, as a Star Wars fan, I will defend Star Wars fans in the sense the vast majority of us are very sensible, and we like what's being done. We don't necessarily like all the movies, but that's the same with the Bond series, I think that there is a part of me that would like to see what a different set of producers and that would make of the Bond films. I'd love to see what someone else would do, but the reality is that's not going to happen. And that's not to say that I don't like what Barbara and Mike have been doing, because I actually really, really like Craig era. But, it's like, that's the kind of, that's the kind of comments that I don't like about certain fans, in the sense of this kind of, first of all, yes, it has taken a long time for certain movies to come out in the Bond series, but there's usually been reasons beyond simply they're not interested in making them. The financial situation with MGM, waiting around for available directors and things like that. And obviously COVID. But I sometimes, the things that frustrate me sometimes with fans is the vitriol that's sometimes expressed without understanding the situation. If you understand the situation and still not happy with it, then feel free to vent. But if people took the time, and it's quite easy to find out this stuff online with the internet, to understand how these films get made and the big machines that are involved and everything, then people might be a bit more relaxed. I'm sure Eon would love to be churning out a Bond film every 2 to 3 years if they could, but it just seems at the moment with MGM and that and the finances, it's just not been viable.
What do you think? All fans are different, but if you were to find themes running through what you think fans' preferences would be, what do you think James Bond fans would like from the films moving forward?
Isn't that's the problem, isn't it? Because ask 100 James Bond fans, you get 100 different answers. There's the generalization of what a Bond film is and all that, but then come down to the nitty gritty of, would you want to be more dramatic? Do you want to be more lighthearted? Do you want it to be somebody who is an actor who's 6.5 foot tall? Do you mind if they're 5.5 foot tall? Everybody has slightly different attitudes. And for me, that's, I know a lot of people would like to go back to more the traditional formula, the structure, the plots, whereas I would love to go much more adventurous with storytelling and kind of ditch the formula. So who knows? And which is one of the reasons why I kind of feel like it would be maddening and really impossible to listen to the fans if you were the producers of these movies, because who do you listen to?
Do you think, I mean, when the films are made, they're massive, massive operations, do you think they just leave all those opinions outside the door? Or do you think they will settle down and think, well, kind of, we need to cover that base, we need to keep those people happy, we need to make sure or is it part of a creative process? You take on board those views, or do they just do their own thing and hope people like it?
I wonder if that's why they got rid of Danny Boyle. I think that maybe that, I don't know, I kind of imagine Michael Wilson perhaps being the sense check of like the franchise and almost giving the sort of the yay or nay as to whether Bond would do that. I think perhaps they've got a feel for what the fans want, or what Bond would or wouldn't do, and how far they're willing to go. And I just think it sounds like he was pushing the boundaries too much. And there were certain things that they looked to keep consistent with Bond, and perhaps, he was going outside of that. I think there are kind of key core themes to Bond. I think it's probably time to change some of them, like the Aston Martin DB5. And I think there's a sort of, fans are starting to say some of that as well. It needs to move on from some of those, but yeah.
I think what probably drives the creative process, and it alludes to something that you just said, Alex. I think what probably drives the creative process more is box office. And if you have a film that is a colossal success, then that's going to probably influence the creative thinking going forward for the next 2-3 films, until you hit one that kind of doesn't do that well. And I mean, I don't know. They probably do, to some extent, keep abreast of what's being said. There probably are people online looking at the film fan forums and getting a feel for what the responses are out there. But at the end of the day, I would hope that they are sure enough in their ideas to just go for the right writers and the right directors and believe in the project that they're developing. And, I can only say that as a fan myself, I just want to be surprised every time I go into the theatre. I don't necessarily want to see the same things again. So I would hope that's what drives their creative process. But I bet box office plays a lot in it as well.
Yeah. We talked about Skyfall earlier. And that seemed, that, whether you like it or not, because I know, Joe, I don't think it's because of the elements of the film that makes you, it's just not a film you're keen on. That's fair enough. My feeling about that film is where everything seemed to it was just a crossroads where it seemed, whether it's luck or good judgment, whether it was timing, whether it was the year it came out, for me, it was serious enough, gritty enough to keep this element happy. It was commercial enough, funny enough, and fun enough to get anyone into the cinema and enjoy it. It could be taken as a one-off quite easily. Had a very popular theme tune. To me, that it wasn't luck that got such a huge amount of box office. In terms of the product, it might have been luck that the product ended up like that. Certainly may have been luck that the London Olympics was so incredibly popular, and Britain was suddenly an incredibly great place to kind of showcase again. But that to me would be one where you think actually the elements were all in place there. But again, that was probably the last Bond before social media went completely.
But if you look at that film and you look at what we know of, I've been trying to avoid a lot of the gossip and rumours about No Time to Die, but if you just look at, I have seen the trailers. If you look at the trailers, it's very clear that they are making a Bond film that is more about Bond and his character and his emotional story and the relationships he has. And that's Skyfall. And you can see that they've looked at the success of Skyfall and said, right, we want to repeat something like that. I think it would have been interesting had Skyfall not hit well with audiences and it just been a modest success. I'm not sure that we would have had, a movie like Spectre, and I'm not sure we'd be setting up for a Bond film where for the very first time we have the leading female character coming back in a relationship with Bond. And who knows where that's going to go. And I think clearly I think there is a reason why Skyfall was successful, is that I think it broached out beyond Bond fans. Because I think it is just generally a very good drama thriller.
Yeah.
And it just so happens that it's a Bond film. And I think that I would imagine a lot of new fans came in because of that film, because it's more of a kind of character-driven story.
That seemed to appeal to the public almost more, I don't know, more than fans, as much as fans. It really caught the imagination of people who hadn't perhaps seen Bond for quite a long time, or you know, I had older kind of friends who don't normally go to the cinema, but they were going to the cinema to see that. It got a real word of mouth. Maybe that was an Olympics sort of year type thing as well, but it seemed to, like you say, bring new fans in.
I think a few have done that, haven't they? I think Goldfinger probably did that. I think Spy Who Loved Me probably did that. And I think GoldenEye probably did that.
Yeah.
Not as much, because clearly Skyfall was something above and beyond in terms of how successful it was. But there's a few of those films where you think, even if you just look at the figures, there's no way that a very large number of people weren't going in for the first time to watch a Bond film, because it's just so much up on the one before. So new people must, the law of averages must mean that people were going in who hadn't been to see a Bond film, or were just kind of casual viewers in the way they weren't before. I'm going to kind of cross the Rubicon here a bit with the next question, and I hope we don't go into murky territory. But there are clearly some issues which we may go in a future briefing room talk about at greater length. There are a few issues when it comes to Bond groups talking about the next films that always cause a great deal of discussion, putting it mildly. Can a black actor play James Bond, or should a black actor play James Bond, is one of them. We've got this code name thing that keeps cropping up as being an issue where, 007 is forever linked to being somebody called James Bond, and whether that could be more than one person. You've got, I think, would it be even more than a black actor playing Bond? Could there ever be a female 007? Well, maybe that's coming up in No Time to Die in a different way. But some fans get really, really steamed up about it. Now, I have no problem with somebody saying that their preference would be the character would be a certain way, X, Y, and Z. I do struggle a bit with some of the reasoning behind it, which is that that's not what Ian Fleming wrote back decades and decades and decades ago. Because clearly, by the time Goldfinger was out, they'd moved on from Fleming in terms of the literature and taken it, into the 1960s. So I do find that a bit confusing. But without going into the necessarily the details, why do you think fans get so worked up about the prospects of more substantial change like that, particularly the character himself or herself?
I think Ian said it earlier, people just don't like change. They like their comfort zone. And I think some of these things take people out of their comfort zone. I think some of them are really quite interesting. And I think, we mentioned earlier that change can be good. I mean, people didn't want a blonde Bond, but that seemed to work out okay. So I think it's just that the set ways of what Bond should or shouldn't be. And I guess he hasn't changed that much over 25 films, or he has slowly.
I mean, it's an odd one, isn't it? Because the barriers of what's acceptable to change about Ian Fleming do seem to be rather flexible, don't they? Because he has to be a certain age. Oh, no, it's fine. He can be a bit older. He can be in his 50s. That's fine. He has to look a certain way, but it's okay. His hair can be different. So all of those things have already been done differently. So it does seem a little bit like it's okay to take Fleming with a pinch of salt, unless it's a particular pinch of salt.
Yeah, but there's another element. Again, I think it comes down partly to what I said earlier, which is that if you're a passionate fan and you hear these things and it really butts up against your idea of what you like and maybe what you personally identify with as in the character, or what you, because I'm sure there's a lot of male fans that secretly wish they were Bond and, you know, identify with that kind of fantasy element. And again, it reminds them that actually the decision is not theirs to make if these things happen. But I think that there's another element which is just in general in the world at the moment, which is this whole notion of political correctness. And the whole kind of politicizing of these arguments from both sides, the whole kind of pro-political correct or the liberal versus the conservative, the right wing. And that's what becomes tiresome. I totally understand if you as a fan hold great stock in what Fleming wrote on the page and feel that that's how the character should be adapted, and therefore to do anything slightly different to that in some ways isn't true to that character. I understand that. What I don't understand is why people get furious and vitriolic about a decision that hasn't been made. You know, this is just pure speculation, and it's important, and also it's important to note that the whole thing about a black or a non-white actor playing Bond, to my understanding, the two sources of that whole discussion was Pierce Brosnan when we were talking about Colin Salmon taking over the role a few years back publicly, just as his idea of an actor who'd be good, and then the whole Sony leak where it was Amy Pascal who was involved in the production of recent Bond films, and she said that, you know, someone like Idris Elba should be an actor that should play it. And then of course that gets seized on by the media, and then it becomes this hot button topic in fandom, where from just pure speculation behind the scenes of these are the kind of actors that will be good, it suddenly becomes, this is what they're going to do, they've got an agenda. You know, and it's the same thing in Star Wars with the whole kind of Kathleen Kennedy's got this feminist agenda to throw women into every single role, blah, blah, blah. How come the women are so super powerful compared to men, blah, blah, blah. And you sit there and think, really, these are just films, these are just entertainment. But it is true that it's good when they reflect the society that are watching them. And I think we should just chill out a bit. You know, let's not get furious about a decision that hasn't been made. And then equally, if it does happen, just deal with it. It's just a movie.
And actually, it's that kind of, it's, like you say, it's more the reactions to some, normally have reactions to things that have happened.
Yeah.
You know, rather than furious reactions to the non-existent, which is always quite odd. But I must admit, I do find it difficult that even that causes that amount of just, anger. In both ways. I do mean both ways, because it's, you know, they're very quick to defend something that hasn't happened as well.
The downside to this whole thing is that no matter how sensible you're trying to be, you inevitably end up getting drawn into these discussions. You know, if you're hovering around them and you get drawn into them because, you know, you want to try to make a counterpoint, and then the next thing you know, your temperature is rising, your blood's starting to boil. And the other thing is that there have definitely been times in the last few years, in Bond fandom and other fandoms where I've been so frustrated and tired and angered by what I've seen that you just want to say, sod fandom, and just walk away from it. And that would be really, really detrimental, because the vast majority of fans that I've interacted with are really cool people. And I've made friends for it. We've all made friends for it. And it's like, it's just that sadly toxic negative element that are very, very vocal, and in your face, that can just, I mean,
But sometimes they are kind of vocal about things that have happened. I'm thinking about musical choices like the Billie Eilish theme song. That really divided opinion. But again, I think there was some kind of politics within some of the arguments about that. It wasn't just the piece of music. And, you know, that was quite divisive. But I think a brave choice that they made, and I think it was good, again, to sort of push the boundaries on the musical front. But yeah.
I think it's, you get within that, I think about the group, you've sort of got within the group, you've got the kind of quiet collectors, haven't you, who they're more interested in the paraphernalia, and that's absolutely fine. You've kind of got, we do all this, but I would consider myself as a Bond fan to be quite a casual fan, really. You know, I don't, I love the films and I'll rewatch them over and over again, and I'll read the books. But beyond that, it's a film series that I love, and that's kind of where I am with it. You have, as Ian pointed out, an element of people who sort of just fantasize about being James Bond, which is kind of, which is fine. We talked about it earlier from, our first experiences of it. And then you've got, like you say, I would say probably a vocal minority of fans who feel very, very strongly about how they do or don't want things to proceed in the future, or certain elements that they see as not fitting in with the way that they would have the series. And the only thing I would say about that, everyone's got a right to an opinion. What I find difficult and challenging is where you kind of get the "it's this" end of, because why would you be part of a Facebook group if you didn't want any kind of discussion? If you're going to say, there will be people who think James Bond will forever and a day be a red-blooded heterosexual male in the style of Hoagie Carmichael from now until Doomsday, which is fine, but you can't then just put "end of," because it's sort of, I found it with this. It was a Star Wars thing. Sorry, I'm rambling now. You can edit it out. And there was a Star Wars thing where they started the discussion about the countdown of the worst to the best Star Wars films by saying, "We all know what number one's going to be, and rightfully so," and then talked about it. And you think, well, anyone watching that's not their favourite film is suddenly in the out crowd. And you kind of think, well, that kind of thing I find difficult. There should always be an opinion. I get that, but it's not a definitive opinion, is there?
It'd be a bit boring.
Yes. No. It would be. Yeah. It would be boring. Right, okay. What we are. Can you be a fan and not like Ian Fleming? Yes or no?
Yes.
Can you be a fan and never have read Ian Fleming?
Yes.
Okay. Can you be a fan and not have watched any film before the Pierce Brosnan film?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was a fan after one film. I think, I think it's degrees of, I guess fan is fanatical, and I became fanatical maybe after 3 or 4 films.
You had to get your regular fix.
Yeah. No, I'd got proper fanatical, like painting my bedroom wall with a big mural and putting newspaper curtains up. And then I sought help. But, I've always been very all-consumed by James Bond. When I really thought I was the only person in the world who liked Bond, because I never met anybody else who did until I came online. And that was really quite... it was nice to know I'm not alone.
But do you think it's this is going to sound incredibly rude. Do you think if you were collectively, I'm saying this, a bit younger than ourselves, maybe in your early 20s, and you'd grown up with, and what I think of now, you've probably only really grown up with Daniel Craig. You may refer back to Pierce Brosnan. I don't know how much, because I like watching black and white films from, the 30s and 40s or whatever, and I enjoy them, but that's because I kind of like watching those films. I'm not sure if that wasn't what you liked, which is watching old films. There would be an awful lot to a younger fan about From Russia with Love, for example. Because they're kind of timepieces, aren't they? So maybe it's, there is something to be said for the kind of modern Bond fan of recent years.
Yeah, the thing is, it's I'd answered yes to all those questions, but at the same time, you would probably have a more fulfilling enjoyment of a fan if you read, if not all the books, some of the books. For me, the Bond novels that I read more of earlier were the John Gardner novels, because those are the ones that were being published in my childhood and in my teenage years. So, every time a new one came out, I'd be down to the library, or I'd be over to, Waterstones or Smiths or whatever and getting it. And again, I think, if my daughter, for instance, she really only does know Daniel Craig in the role. We tried to sort of show her some older ones and she's not interested. But there might be a point later on when she's a bit older that she decides, actually, I fancy having a look at one of the older ones to see how that goes. So I certainly don't subscribe to the idea that you've got to consume everything to be a fan. But it would probably give you a richer experience if you consumed as much of it as you could.
I think if you're a fan, you would have that natural curiosity
Yeah.
to seek out everything or anything. You might not enjoy the books, but I think you'd have that curiosity to want to have at least read the Flemings. So, I mean, I used to buy Bond books whenever I found them at car boot sales, so I've got multiple copies of the same Bond book just because I can't not buy something. I've got better at that now, but I couldn't not buy something that was Bond just because it was Bond.
There's also there's something of a joy in the audio books and radio plays and things, aren't there?
The comics and the graphic novels. Yeah, I know a lot of there are Bond fans that their big thing is like the music and the soundtracks and everything like that, which is terrific. I think there's a way to find your into this world, and you should just enjoy it the way you can.
I mean, there's parts of I haven't really got into like the graphic novels and the comic books and things like that. I've got a few of them, but that didn't really do much for me, so I haven't sort of pursued that any further. So, as you say, people will find what's of interest to them.
Okay. We're getting close to wrapping up, but I've got my final question to you. So No Time to Die has now come out.
Well, it was meant to.
It's an exclusive. No, we're looking in the future.
Okay.
Eventually, whether it's this year, next year, 3 years, when there's a vaccine, it's been successful, and Daniel Craig has finished his time as James Bond. The producers ring you up and they say, right, where do we go next? You are the fan we are asking. We're getting ready to gear up our next film, and we want your opinions on where we go with it. And you're our number one fan to help us decide. Joe, what would your ideal next step be?
Well, thanks for asking, Alex. I'd say I think we need a fair bit younger actor who can be in the films for a run. And if they're only making them every 4 years, then I think perhaps younger than they have been up to now for the first film. I probably want to keep them British, but other than that, I have no real particular choice of actor. And I'd be kind of keen to go back to standalone films rather than necessarily having a story arc. I mean, I'm sure there's parts of the character they'll develop over the films, but I wouldn't necessarily look for a reboot starting from day one, getting the 00 license. That would be my view.
And Joe, are we talking big blockbuster fun, or are we talking gritty espionage thriller?
More towards the gritty espionage thriller, but still keeping it mainstream enough to be appealing. So good luck with that.
Okay, Ian, they've rung you. They didn't like what Joe had to say, so they've rung you.
Rubbish.
Yeah. I have no preference in terms of what an actor should look like or anything like that for playing the role. I'm just interested in somebody who is a good rangy actor who can bring something new to the role. Because I think the actors that we're probably more, the actors that are our favourites in the role are probably the ones that bring something quite distinctive, whether it be humour, whether it be drama, whether it be suaveness, whatever. I really do like what's been done in the current era. So I'm actually going to go opposite to Joe, which is that I would actually like to see them develop a series of movies that does have a narrative through line. I don't mean by that it's part 1, part 2, part 3, but that there is some kind of overarching narrative, character or something, because they've tried to do it with the Craig era with mixed results, because they tried to do it retroactively. They're refitting the film before it, and I think that's the wrong way of doing it. And I would just like to see it be, I'd like to see it be a bit more gritty. I'd like to see it continue to be more character driven. But yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, whoever they get in the role is going to bring something to it that the film should then embrace and play to that strength. So if they do decide to hire somebody that's a bit more humorous, then yeah, sure, go for it. Go full out. Give it to Edgar Wright. You know, do a proper full-on Zane's, you know, adrenaline-fueled Bond film. But if you're going to go for an actor more in the vein of someone like Daniel Craig, then you know, embrace that kind of drama.
I have to say, weirdly, I think I probably would be somewhere in between, actually. I think the point you make, Ian, I would absolutely agree with. I know it goes against Joe, which is that I would favour some form of three-film, preconceived, very tight storyline where you could have an individual kind of, I hate the MacGuffin thing, but an individual kind of, you know, like in Life on Mars, stuff like that, where actually there's themes running through it, but there's an individual storyline in each part. 3 films. I would like an established actor, someone like Tom Hardy, who can boss the role and actually is bigger than the role itself and doesn't need it, because I think that, you know, that kind of physicality is the way I think I probably like to go with it. I think I'd kind of like it to be tough enough to be believable, but to still contain those, you know, the humorous elements. And I'd probably like it over a relatively short space of time. So it's kind of, you know, every 2 years, but you've got a start and you've got an end and you know where it's going. Which I agree with Ian. I think they probably happened upon the idea at the end of Quantum of Solace and into Skyfall. They might want to carry it on, and then they found ways of tying it all up, which has been a little bit clumsy, even though the character has developed just fine. Even though the storylines they've been a bit clumsy about, the character I think has developed just fine. So I think that's kind of the way I'd like it to go. But I really like them to be able to watch all 3 without needing to watch any of the 20 however many beforehand.
I'd also really like to see a significant director again behind the camera. And I'm thinking of somebody like, I mean, a lot of people would love to see Christopher Nolan have a crack at it. And I think, you know, he's openly admitted he'd love to make a Bond movie, and he's had discussions with Barbara and Michael. So there is a part of me that does wonder, is he going to be potentially lined up for the next era of Bond? Denis Villeneuve, I remember hearing that he had been approached to do this one, No Time to Die, but wasn't available because of Dune. It'd be really interesting to see, following on for someone like Sam Mendes, who was more of an established director, somebody who had more of an authorial voice as a director to come in and shape Bond. However, that said, with what happened to Danny Boyle, I do wonder if the producers would actually be willing to go that route. And maybe that's the reason why we haven't had Christopher Nolan making a Bond film already, is that they're just not willing to, or ready to cede that much control to him. But I think that would be, I mean, a Christopher Nolan Bond movie right now would be quite something. You know, whether it's a one-off or a couple of films, it'd be really impressive, but who knows?
In terms of the actor, you mentioned Tom Hardy. He's obviously quite a physical actor in sort of Craig vein. I'd quite like a less physical Bond. When they were talking about Tom Hiddleston when he was in Night Manager, that kind of appeal, because he wouldn't be being compared to Craig. I think Tom Hardy is too much like Craig. Somebody who's a little bit more, perhaps acted on his wits a bit more than just brute force. A bit different.
I mean, I've always thought Hiddleston, I can't see him as a contemporary Bond, but I could see him as a period Bond. I could see him, you know, playing it as written on the page. I would like to see, I like Hardy. I'd like to see someone like Luke Evans or someone like that, but he's probably a little bit too old now, I don't know.
Okay. Well, it's been an interesting discussion with 3 people rather than the planned 4, but I'm sure Ian Douglas would have had a completely different view about where the Bond series would go. But I'm going to say thank you very much, and thank you for an interesting discussion. I look forward to talking to you next time on the briefing. Thank you very much.